Hi, welcome to Learn Domain. Today we are going to discuss about the regulatory compliance, and followed by this, what are the key steps to be taken into an account. As you know, understanding about the regulatory compliance standards and all for any of the organization is essentially important nowadays. So to manage regulatory compliance and as well as the kind of risk which is involved in it, there are different steps which will be as follows. The first thing is that model internal and as well as external regulations. Next, followed by this, understanding business systems, processes, and suppliers. Next, assessing the requirements as well as the compliance exposure and risk. Managing risk, followed by real-time traceability. When we talk about the first one, which is called model external and as well as internal regulations, here there are many authorities that set regulations globally, followed by this regionally and as well as locally. And it is challenging to understand how they all relate to one another. When these external authorities introduce or change regulations, the impact to the business can be significant. Further, companies have internal policies and standards they use for their own operations and compliance needs. If we think of this as internal regulations, if you are able to build up an inventory of these regulatory frameworks from both external and as well as internal authorities, then you can show how they can relate to one another and contribute and affect one another. Then, when any one of these changes, the impact or their dependence can be easily traced. When we talk about the second part, which is talk about business systems and processes and suppliers, where there will be a core process that are critical to the operations of business that will be subject to regulatory compliances and all. Followed by this, the kind of processes which will often act across or within the systems and applications that will need to conform to both external as well as internal regulations and all that. For example, when you see the kind of regulatory deals with many aspects of data privacy, and therefore a business process and as well as systems be subject to those specific external regulations as well, has many external policies, followed by the kind of supply who are either performing outsourced services or providing key products into the business supply chain. Therefore, a business need to understand their key business processes, systems, and as well as suppliers that could be candidates for regulatory assessment and compliance. When we talk about the third part, which is called assessing compliance, exposure, and risk, as you know your external as well as internal regulations and your key business process systems and suppliers, you can methodically conduct compliance assessment across all the regulations that are applicable. Those assessments will drive key compliance and non-compliance metrics, highlight key risks and as well as issues, and this provide an overall regulatory exposure view, which can then drive quantifiable metrics and a systematic approach to ongoing compliance reviews. When we're talking about the fourth one, which is called managing a change, as regulatory change comes into two flavors. As the first is where a business is not compliant with existing regulations and therefore needs to execute a remediation or change program on existing processes and systems. The second is where new regulations are introduced or existing regulations are changed and therefore drive new requirements from a change perspective. In either the case, the business case for business change needs to be tightly managed. That means that requirements need to be written, reviewed, and approved. New programs or projects need to be stated as business cases. What are the outcomes, deliverables, risk assumptions, cost, and how do they lie as well as tie into the strategic objectives and solve regulatory exposure issues. The same is true for a finger-grained change requests or existing projects and as well as work efforts. One importantly, setting up capital budgets up and deciding on investment priorities will be driven by knowing the strategic objectives. At the same time, the key performance indicators that the business is measuring itself against the knowing and unknowing what regulations, non-compliance issues need to be addressed. Apart from that, change control is therefore critical to manage these strategic initiatives as well. Last but not least, when we talk about the real-time traceability, as regulatory change program and efforts take flight, their status, progress, risk issues, and as well as realization of outcomes need to be tracked and tied back to their intended outcomes. As a business lead, you may want to see all your regulatory exposures and what investments and deliverables are going to solve this exposure. Or you may want to take a more project-centric view and see what regulatory issues each project is going to be solved. So these are the 5 different regulatory compliance steps which normally anyone has to understand in reference to the regulatory compliance and as well as risk itself is concerned. For more information followed by any kind of assignment or training support or consulting related stuff, please reach out to the contact details which will be posted in below to this video. Thank you.